Is it fair to say that as of this June 21st meeting with Benish, probably for some time, a week, 2 or 3, that you as an attorney knew there was an adverse interest as between Linetti and the Virgin Valley Water District?
The first inkling that I would have had of that, because again, you got to remember, when I got involved in this, it was strictly as a criminal case, a criminal investigation to represent somebody so that he would not be indicted. And I didn't see, he hadn't been sued as yet in any lawsuit. It was a concern that I had in terms of the proffer issue, like I told you. But I didn't see an adverse interest at that point.
All right, so that then leads...
I saw a big adverse interest with the Clark County Grand Jury.
All right, and that's what I want to get to. And it does delve into potential confidences as between you and Mr. Linetti, but I think that the rule does give you authority to tell me the answer to this question, all right? In your opinion then, when Mr. Linetti contacted you on or about June 1st and met with you on June 1st and retained you, what was the nature of that retention? What was it about?
It was purely the grand jury case, 100%.
And then as an attorney then, at what point in time did you also have it in your attorney mind that you were also representing Mr. Linetti now in regard to civil concerns?
Wouldn't have been until it was first brought to my attention by Mr. Bingham that there might, that he might be filing a lawsuit against John.
Which was on June 23rd, 2 days after the meeting that you had with Mr. Benish.
No, that wouldn't be fair. Let's give Mr. Bingham the benefit of the doubt here.
Okay.
He would have had no reason to call me on the 17th of June if it wasn't to express to me that he was at least contemplating this. But lawyers do that all the time. They don't always come to fruition.
So again,
so it wouldn't have been until the 23rd until I really, now all of a sudden it's in my face and it's like, yeah, we have an issue here.
Maybe the direct way to ask you, just look at you and ask you, on June 21st when you were meeting with Benish, did you have any concern about civil liability for Mr. Linetti from the Water District perspective?
Concern, that's a really broad term, because
did you think that...
I didn't know enough of the facts yet to see if there was any real exposure.
Let me say it this way. Let me rephrase it.
Yeah.
Did you feel as though on June 21st when you met with Mr. Benish that John Linetti had any civil exposure, civil liability exposure?
I was more concerned with the forfeiture exposure. There's a forfeiture count in a criminal case, and that's what I was focusing on.
All right, but as far as civil liability was concerned, again, on June 21st when you're meeting with Benish, as an attorney, did you have any concern about civil liability that would flow from the Virgin Valley Water?
Not really. Not really. The concern that I had, look, here's how it played out.
Okay.
There were 3 people named in the civil case, and lo and behold, three people named in the criminal indictment. Now, my take on it was that Mr. Bingham figured that at some point in time, the 3 people named in the civil case that were also named in the criminal indictment were going to have a collateral estoppel problem on their hand if they were found guilty of the criminal cases. Okay, and since the state hadn't charged Mr. Linetti, and neither did Mr. Bingham in his civil case that was in existence at that time, my take on it was that they didn't have it. They didn't have enough to bring it.
All right.
Okay, and so under those circumstances, I weighed that in, and that's why I didn't want to put Mr. Linetti in a situation where he might also be in harm's way on a collateral estoppel issue if he had to plead to something. And with the forfeiture count in that case, that is shooting a fish in a barrel, and I think the court's aware of this. If he gets convicted, the forfeiture is a no-brainer. So no, I was not concerned with his civil exposure, because as a person who had been practicing law for a while by that point in time, I had seen these kinds of scenarios before, and I've seen how they played out. And my thought was, there was no fact that Mr. Bingham didn't have at the time that he filed the original lawsuit. So why didn't he sue John Linetti? And from my point of view at that point in time, it was bluster.
All right, and the last thing I have for you then is just a question I'd want an answer to. At any time, did you advise Mr. Benish affirmatively that Mr. Linetti did have a civil exposure concern at any time?
Probably not. Probably not. I made a unilateral decision after meeting with Mr. Benish, and then after reading the proposed complaint, that this could turn into something, and there's no sense in tempting it.
And the reason I ask that is because it appears to me from the billing statements and such that when the civil complaint, the second amended complaint was filed, which first announces to the world formally.
Well, it wasn't filed until
July
the following
20th.
month, yes.
July 20th. When that was filed, to me, that's an announcement to the world formally that Mr. Linetti does have civil exposure. He's now, for the first time we know, on July 20th, 2011, that Mr. Linetti is a defendant in a civil action. So that's formal notice that he's got civil exposure.
Right.
But I had nothing from Mr. Benish that really went past the day before, July 19th. That's why I asked.
And candidly, that July 19th date can't be right. It just can't be. But that's another issue. And I can tell you that when I got the proposed amended, well, now I see that a lawyer's doing more than just flapping his jaws. And at that point in time, rather than tempt any kind of a problem, I just stopped communicating with Mr. Benish as a consultant, and clearly understood at that point in time that he could never act as an expert.
How sure are you that when you met with Mr. Benish on June 21st, that Mr. Benish said nothing about any conversations or emails or any sort of interface whatsoever with any representatives of the Virgin Valley Water District stemming from his time as counsel?
Let me answer that question upon reflection. Here's the reflection. I can't be 100% sure of anything that happened almost 2 years ago, because human memory just doesn't permit you to be.
Right.
All right, but to the extent that I can say with certainty that I'm sure, given the problem with human memory and nothing more, I'm sure.
Okay, those are all the questions I have for Mr. Gentile. Counsel, do you have any questions based on mine?
I have two.